They don't want to get blown off the board. The Pirc is only played in 4% of E4 openings. Well, it's a flexible approach, but at the same time, Black is building up a giant counter punch. The Pirc is underused, underappreciated, underrated, and therefore is an excellent avenue for an opening-minded, somewhat lazy chess preparer to take advantage of their opponents and have a lot of really, really fun games. I've created a free handout to accompany this video. It goes over our 4 critical maneuvers, our 3 key concepts. It goes over the 3 main lines of the Pirc, gives you a middle game plan to go through each of them in order to excel in the opening and crush your opponents. I'm gonna dive in first and tease you guys. So this is the opening setup. Obviously, white here, they have the center, and Black is thinking, okay, I'm going to counter attack this center, and eventually I'm going to have some sort of a pawn thrust, maybe this pawn, maybe this pawn, maybe this pawn, and I'm gonna, chip away at white's center. But the thing that everyone gets really afraid of is, what if white just comes after you in the Austrian attack? And this is very, very scary to face. And don't worry, we're gonna address it. So let's jump in first to the classical variation. Let's start with the opening lines from the Black perspective. So there's a bunch of different ways to get there. White generally can open with E4. This also works. You could play it against D4. You can play it against F4. You could play it against all sorts of stuff, but we're gonna go over the main line. Black here allows white to take the center, with the idea being that his pieces, eventually this bishop's gonna go here, this knight's gonna attack the center, he's gonna look for these type of pawn breaks to really undermine white's center. So the game continues. Here is the first critical decision for white. White has a bunch of different ways to respond. If white is very, very aggressive, we might approach it one way, versus if he's a little bit more passive, we'll approach it a bit of a different way. And the classical variation, we can reach it 2 different ways. So first off, white can play bishop to E2, or he could play knight to F3. Typically these transpose. In this line here, let's look at bishop E2 first. And so Black gets to just play his normal setup. So right here, what white's next move is bishop to F4. He's somewhat preventing this E5 push, and that's going to be a really, really common idea by Black to either force an exchange here in the center or to get white to push forward and lock the center. We're going to look at 2 different approaches for this. The first idea, and we can strike back right here, is C5. A key idea on the Pirc is you want to get your counterplay as quickly as possible. You don't want to let white just call all the shots. So we're going for it right away. Right here with this capture and recapture, obviously Black, typically we're not worried about a queen capture and a recapture, because this queen trade happens. We're going to have that open D file. We're going to be really happy. So this is actually white's best move per the engine. White creates this potential weakness here on E5, or it could be a potential strength, as you'll see, particularly if he does play this E5 line and Black responds with E6 at any point, obviously after the knight moves. That creates this really weak square here on F6. A white knight can eventually just jump his way in there, lock himself in with the pawn supporting it, and really go after the king. So there's one thing I really, really want to stress. We're trying to get white to overextend their pawns and then target those weak extended pawns. So if we look here to this position, this E5 move, we're trying to exploit that. We want to get our knight out here to double attack it. You're going to get this H3 move quite often, and this knight remaneuver over and back to F5 is going to be pretty common. If white wants to prevent that, he's going to have to play here to G4, So that's got, obviously some drawbacks, but really the overall purpose here, try to exploit a weakness, try to exploit white to push forward and then target those advanced passed pawns. Okay, so going back here, instead of the c5 move, we talked about potentially black preparing this e5 thrust. Why do I personally enjoy the e5 line? Let me show you. So in this game here, we end up transposing into a classical, luckily enough, and I castle. And right here, this trade of bishop for knight is a really key idea. You want to take a look out for it whenever possible. It's going to leave white's central pawns even more weak. He decides to recapture with his g-pawn, damaging his structure. Otherwise, if he did recapture, let's say with his queen, I'd get my knight in here. He'd either have to move his queen or push his pawn and weaken his pawn structure. So he decides to recapture with the pawn instead. And then I get this e5 push in. I move my knight back here to e7. That's a really, really common move idea. I think here I could also look at going to d4 instead. The computer actually does like that a bit better. I'd already be targeting this pawn, putting pressure on it, but I'm used to the e7 move, so that's what I play. And after white castles queenside, we have opposite side castles, but the great thing about this position for black is that this f4 square is very weak. I'm able to exert pressure on here, get this knight over here. This position is locked, so the central locked position is blocking white's bishop from getting to my king, and I just have a very pleasant position to play. I've got a lot of stuff going for me. This trade of dark squared bishop away from white is, I think, not the plan. I just mentioned how the dark squares are already kind of weak. Now they're very weak, and then I'm able to plant my knight here and start pushing my way forward, gaining space, and I do eventually, after some blunders, work my way down here and end up winning this game. One more tactic I want to focus on is when you're trying to execute this e5 push, a lot of times it looks like it's not going to be possible, but there is this key defensive attacking tactical resource. So let's take a look at it. Right here, e5 is possible. It doesn't really look like it should be. We have 3 defenders from white, and we only have 2 attackers, but we have here a hidden attacker, I'll call it. So we play e5, after captures, we recapture here, allowing this discovery attack. And this type of tactical try is going to be available in a lot of lines, so be sure to look out for it. So that's a classical line. You're going to see that line the most common of any of the Pirc lines. A lot of stuff transposes to it, and everyone who has no idea how to play against the Pirc, they accidentally end up in the classical. Not like it's a bad opening or anything, or a bad approach to it. That's just what people end up doing. I hope that you saw a lot of the key maneuvers that are going to make you successful in the Pirc. That e5 move, it's going to be a lot easier than you think it is due to tactics. Trading off your b5 pawn for the e4 pawn, that's going to be there. And then your big knight maneuver as you go out over to g4 in order to target that e5 pawn that's been overextended by white. That's going to show up all the time. Make sure you take a look at your cheat sheet if you need it. Not during the game, of course, but let's go into the 150 attack That's the most natural attack, non-theoretical attack that whites really common could go into. It looks a lot like the same-ish variation of the King's Indian, and if you don't know what to do, it can get really scary, so let's hit it. What happens if he sets up for a giant kingside attack, castles long, and starts coming after you? Well, let's take a look into it. There's a couple different ways that we could approach it. The first way is the scary way. The only thing I know about the Pirc is I'm going to castle and then hope everything is good. And then there's a way we're going to recommend where we are going to get our counter punch very, very early. We're going to have a plan, and we're going to know what to do going into the middle game. There's a bunch of different moves that white can play here that clearly show negative intentions, and this bishop to g5 move is one of them. This would be very similar if he moved here to e3 or to f4, and it would also be very similar if he moved his pawn up to f3. Both of those moves indicate, okay, well, the queen's probably coming here, I'm probably castling long, and there's going to be some sort of a pawn storm coming, and you better be ready because I'm coming after your king. And so what black could do here is he could go about his normal development. The castling would happen. Black would start building up some sort of a queenside attack after h4. It's usually best to play h5 to prevent h5 from showing up on the board. And then white has a lot of really, really natural moves. Black's going to try to get his counterplay in. White's basically already here. And this apparently is roughly equal. White's got a little bit of advantage. Black hasn't quite equalized yet, but black should be okay. Now, I don't know about you looking at this position, but for me, this is terrifying. This is why when I first started playing the Pirc a lot, I kept getting rolled over, steamrolled, and didn't know how to really, really fight back. I would try to attack on the queen side, white would attack on the king side, and then white has all these natural moves and would somehow get to me first. So let's go back and let's find a different approach. We know white's intentions. Why don't we defer the development of our bishop and defer castling? So if white's building up this big kingside attack, why should our king be over there? We know that white's going to be coming after our king, and we have to do something a little bit differently if we don't want to be super, super uncomfortable and caught in this big theoretical line. We want to have our counterplay, and we want to leave our options open. We want to have our middle game plan, and we don't necessarily need to play into white's plan. So let's take a look here. So the bishops come out. What I'm going to recommend here is let's not move our bishop to g7 and castle quite yet. In a lot of lines, what white's going to do is white's going to move to h6, and if we can just wait for him to do that and then move our bishop and exchange that in one move, that's going to be better for us. So let's take a look here. So let's go ahead and start preparing our kingside advance. So this c6 move here, this restricts the black knight from these squares. This prepares the b5 push, and this also opens up our queen to be able to get over to this a5 square, which we're going to play in a lot of different lines. So white's going to continue with his plan. We're going to continue with our plan. Again, we're kind of ignoring each other just like in the previous line. This knight move right here, we're going to be moving here, we're going to be moving here, we're going to be moving here and attacking this queen. And with this queen to a5 move, keep a lookout for that. That's going to be a common idea in a lot of our lines. Why this queen a5 move? So we haven't committed our king yet, over to the king side. We're kind of leaving our options open, and white has not committed where his king is going. We're having a slight deterrence. Okay, well, we're getting our pieces over here on the queen side, so if you go queen side, you might have an issue. So let's just say that we have castles. We're already looking at this type of move dislodging the knight and taking the pawn. And then conversely, let's say he doesn't castle. Let's say that, okay, I'm going to try to defend that. Well, we can again just move our pawn straight forward because of this pin on the queen and the rook. It exerts a lot of pressure. It also opens up in a lot of these lines. We mentioned earlier that our plan is we're going to bring our knight here and here. If you look at that just a little bit closer, let's put some random moves on the board. Let's say that white develops his pieces this way. We can still play this move, and you know, it looks like, okay, cool, well, we're going to be damaging our pawn structure and we're going to have double pawns. However, this opens up a future path for our rook to go ahead and attack, and especially when the king is over here on the queen side, if he has already decided to castle, this doubled pawn on the c file is going to open up a lot of possibilities for us. And so that's why this a5 move is potentially very, very powerful. Okay, so the one other thing we have to be ready for when we play the Pirc is what happens if white pushes e5 early and comes after us before he's fully castled, before we're fully ready for him. Well, let's take a look in two lines right here and see what can transpire. So if we go with our original main line where we're going to castle, and white immediately plays this e5 move, we run into this little bit of a theoretical line you have to know. So if you are playing the main line here with kingside castling, you take, and put the knight out here. And so when you see this, obviously what's happening is we're potentially giving up a queen trade and forfeiting our right to castle. Unlike in the previous line where we get our rook out to d8, we're just going to lose the right to castle. But you'll also notice that this e5 pawn is very, very weak. So there is a very decent chance that we're going to go up a pawn in this line. So let's see what happens if takes. The best line for white is this check, and then we just block here, and then we're gonna go through and we're gonna try to collect that e5 pawn. If white does decide, okay, I'm going to defend this right here, then we have this nice fork between the bishop and the rook. White also isn't castling. Also, in a lot of these lines as well, what you want to look out for is being able to play c6 and king to c7. Tucking away your king, you'll free up your bishop to move again. You'll be able to bring your rook here to the center, and black's going to have a very, very nice game. Okay, now let's say instead of that, you're following the advice of this video and you play this c6 move, and white decides at this point, okay, now I'm going to play this e5 move. You got to be ready for this e5 move at essentially every point in time, because it's always going to be a threat. Kind of very, very similar. We're going to take. We can actually capture here. Rook captures, and we're going to go after that pawn yet again. If white does decide to defend, we'll go after it again. And if white defends once more, we'll go after it again once more. And at this point, white's best move here, because he's going to lose this pawn, is to push it forward and to damage black's structure. So again, black's doing very, very fine here with this e5 move. Look for the weak e5 pawn. It might be available for you, and you're going to have a really good game. Ooh. So now for the moment we've all been waiting for, the Austrian attack. Don't be too afraid, we're gonna get it figured out. So, okay, so back to the board. We've got f4 on the board. Now, this next move right here, we've prepared bishop to g7. That's still going to be the recommended move, and it is main line. White continues to advance, and now here's the major divergence. Main line Pirc actually is castling into this complete and utter insanity. So if you want to do this, feel free. Get ready for a very quick e5, and the move in the Pirc that is within style is retreating your knight back, right? White can continue forward here. Black now gets some counterplay here, restrikes at white's center. But if you don't know exactly what you're doing and you don't want to know a ton of theory, this sequence is going to be really scary. It's going to be really hard. So let's go back and get something that's going to be a little bit easier for you here, okay? Okay, back to it with lines that are a little bit less insane and a bit more approachable for guys like you and me. So, Austrian attack, f4 on the board. Like I mentioned, we're going to play bishop to g7. It's a little bit less so to get immediately castled. Obviously, that's going to be a possibility for us, and we want to have that option. But it's more so for the counterplay that we're going to get right away. So white continues here, natural development. He's naturally going to get all of his pieces, this giant pawn storm on the king side. He is hoping for castles right here. And what we want to do is we actually want to disappoint him a little bit. And we want to play this c5 move right now. And now I know what you might be thinking, okay, cool, this looks a little bit insane. What happens if we have captures? Okay, well, I mean, what's the point? We're going to lose our right to castle. But that's really not what we're going to be doing here. If we do have this captures move right here, I think you might know the general idea based on our previous line. We want to get that queen out to a5 and get some counterplay. And I know what you're thinking, hey, did I just sacrifice a pawn right here? Well, I mean, kind of, but also kind of not. Because if white is a little bit greedy here and grabs this pawn, knight at c4. And I get this game very often. What's the whole point? Well, the knight, it is pinned to the king, so it can't move. It's being triple attacked, and it's only being defended once. So we're going to get that one pawn back here with a little bit of interest. White's king's not able to castle, and black's going to have a ton of fun. So let's go back just a little bit here and see kind of what other options that white can actually play. So yeah, knight f3. We want to get our immediate counterplay here. Instead of captures here, let's just say that, you know, white goes in with this bishop check. We can block it. If he goes e5, it's going to get really scary here. Knight out here. So this knight move out here is going to be really common. I think you've seen it in some of the other lines where potentially if he gets harassed around, he'll reroute to here. But if he doesn't, the whole idea of the Pirc is we are chipping away on white's center here. So what does that look like? Well, that looks like, okay, well, this pawn is under strike, and then we'll have a double attack. Oh my gosh. Sorry, I'm looking for my alt key. Then we'll have a double attack here and here on this pawn with only one defender. So we're going to get this crazy position in the middle. And if you look at this right now, I think you can tell that black's king is much safer than white's king. And with white's pawn super far advanced, we're going to have a really fun game. Okay, so why even play the Pirc? You're allowing white to grab the center, to start charging forward, to build up this big attack, but at the same time, black is building up a giant counter punch and is just getting ready for the right opportunity to unleash it. The Pirc is only played in 4% of E4 openings. And so you're going to be ready, you're going to know all the variations, you're going to be able to exploit any small misstep by your opponent. Hit me up in the comments below. What did I miss? What other variations do you need me to cover? I'll be sure to get back to you. Have a great day.